We left off 2 weeks ago with Utah polygamy under fire by the federal government. The year was 1885. LDS president, third president, John Taylor, and his two counselors had to flee the country because of polygamous status. Actually, one fled the country and two fled the area. 2 years later, in 1887, politicians passed the Edmunds-Tucker Bill or Act, which allowed wives involved in polygamous marriages to actually testify against their own husbands in a court of law. This was unheard of before. The Edmunds-Tucker Act also made adultery a felony, and then it hit the Mormon church right where they cannot stand to be hit, in the assets. The church was disincorporated, and seizure of all church real estate valued at $50,000 was set in place. Suddenly, but like before, the Mormons started to publicly deny the practice altogether. And plural marriage went underground, where it has remained even to some extent to this very day. In 1890, nearly 1,300 Mormons had been jailed for polygamy. In 1889, Wilford Woodruff had taken over as new prophet of the church, and he literally inherited a nightmare. Personally, Woodruff believed and practiced polygamy and even announced that essentially no one on earth could stop it from continuing on. He also believed that a favorable ruling from the Supreme Court would challenge the constitutionality of the Edmunds-Tucker Act, but he believed wrong. And bottom line, Woodruff was faced with either allowing federal marshals to dismantle and sell off the unfinished Salt Lake Temple or to discontinue polygamy. This is why and where Mormon polygamy began to erode. It had absolutely nothing to do with a revelation. I say this emphatically because missionaries will often say, well, polygamy was just sort of part of our early church, and the prophet was told by God no more. But that is simply not true. It was a matter of survival, and God gave his convenient revelation. You're going to hear about the revelation in a second. Woodruff, after having on a number of occasions defended the existence of plural marriage and claiming it would never go away, released an official manifesto on September 25th of 1890, which admonished every Mormon to no longer enter into polygamy or into plural marriage. Said Woodruff, quote, "Inasmuch as laws have been enacted by Congress forbidding plural marriages, I hereby declare my intention to submit to those laws and to use my influence with the members of the church over which I preside to have them do likewise." End quote. Listen to this again. When LDS people that say polygamy was just a temporary thing and that the stoppage of it was a revelation from God, listen to Wilford Woodruff's words. He says, "Inasmuch as laws have been enacted by Congress forbidding plural marriage, I hereby declare my intention to submit to those laws and to use my influence with the members of the church, which I preside, to have them do likewise." Author Richard Abanus points out in his book, One Nation Under Gods, that the revelation differed dramatically from other revelations that have ever been given to the LDS, and he lists the following differences as to why. He says, before it was issued, this so-called revelation was written, rewritten, edited, and re-edited many times behind closed doors by various persons ranging from Mormon politicians to LDS apostles to non-Mormon legal advisors. Also, it was addressed to whom it may concern, a decidedly secular phrase that failed to hold the authority of "Thus saith the Lord" declaration that other revelations supposedly had. It was publicly issued as a press release from Washington by Utah Delegate Congressman John T. Kane, rather than being presented to the congregation by church authorities at a church conference, which was how other revelations had always been presented. It was not signed by the LDS Church First Presidency, but was only signed by Wilford Woodruff. Hence the first person, how he alluded to himself as, I will do this. Not, "Thus saith the Lord," not the church, not we, but I. Woodruff carefully worded the manifesto to read, "I now publicly declare that my advice to the LDS is to refrain from contracting any marriage forbidden by law in the land." which meant that the entire declaration was Woodruff's personal advice rather than a commandment from God. Thus, a sort of theological loophole was given for disobedience. The point: Mormonism head prophet, seer, and revelator Wilford Woodruff issued a statement that would appease federal officers and the Supreme Court so that the liquidation of LDS assets would cease and their petition for statehood would be granted. But in the end, faithful Latter-day Saints continued to practice polygamy, with the actual illegal marriages being secretly performed by leading members of the church, including Wilford Woodruff, who issued the manifesto in 1890. Lying, either to bring about a greater good or to protect the image of the church, has always been an acceptable practice in Mormonism. It was the foundation of lies from the top upon which the religion was built. Even the missionaries today, in most cases, thinking that they have a right to withhold information to seeking investigators, will, for the good of the cause, not reveal all that the investigator would want to know before they join the church. Most members do the same thing. Now, I want you to know, I've said this before, I personally have no problem with a church that says we worship the tuft of hair on a goat's chin. Let it save us. Halabadahanaha. I don't care. Let them alone. I'll try to teach them Jesus. I'll share them Jesus. But if I ask them, what do you worship? And they say the tuft on a goat's chin, I'll say, well, are you sure you want to worship that? Yes, we do. Fine and dandy. The problem I have with Mormonism is it lies to you. That's the problem. And it continues to be deceptive. Not only in their missional efforts out there, with the boys knocking on the doors, they get people baptized and hooked in without them knowing anything about the church. And then to the top, they still don't. This is the thing we fight against. If Mormonism came out and said, this is exactly how we believe, this is what we think, there's no equivocation here, well, we'd leave you alone. The second thing that we attack, however, is that they claim that this is Christianity. Those 2 points are what we go after. While the facts today proved absolutely contrary, Wilford Woodruff then openly swore in court that polygamous men were to only live with one wife and that polygamy was prohibited. Listen to an extract from Wilford Woodruff's testimony in the Supreme Court when he testified. Tell me, can you hear the wordsmithing going on? Listen to what he says and then listen to the facts. He writes, the U.S. asks, state whether or not it would be contrary to the law of the church for any member of the church to enter into or contract a plural marriage. Wilford Woodruff said it would be contrary to the laws of the church. What would be the penalty? Woodruff said, any person entering into plural marriage after that date of 1890, when he issued this manifesto, would be liable to become excommunicated from the church. U.S. asked, do you understand that language was to be expanded and to include a further statement of living or associating in plural marriage by those already in the status? What that question is saying, listen, do you understand that people who already have polygamous wives cannot continue in that they have to live with only one wife? Woodruff said, yes, sir. I intended the proclamation to cover the ground, to keep the laws, to obey the law myself, and expected the people to obey the law. U.S., was the manifesto intended to apply to the church everywhere? Yes, sir, said Woodruff. U.S., in every nation and every country? Woodruff, yes, sir, as far as I had any knowledge in the matter. U.S., in places outside the United States as well as within the United States? Woodruff, yes, sir. We are given no liberties for entering into that anywhere. U.S., unlawful cohabitation, as it is named and spoken of, should also stop, as well as future polygamous marriages? Yes, sir, that has been the intention. And that has been your views and explanation of it, the U.S. asked? Yes, sir, that has been my view. D. Michael Quinn writes in his examination, he's a great historian of LDS information, writes, quote, Wilford Woodruff personally performed 7 new plural marriages to be performed in Mexico. He also approved polygamous marriages for a couple of Mexican residents as early as 1891, which is a year after he issued the manifesto. He delegated George Q. Kennan, his first counselor, to give approval for plural marriages from 1892 to 1898. That approval was in the form of written letters. Woodruff himself married a new plural wife in 1897, 7 years after he said the manifesto said it would not be done, and after he testified to the U.S. Senate that there would be no more polygamy, period, done, ended, over. Yes, sir, liar, liar, liar. He's a liar. He's a liar just like Brigham Young was a liar. He's a liar just like Joseph Smith was a liar. The church was built on a foundation of deception. I don't know about John Taylor. I haven't found the deceptions of him if he has them. But those other guys all lied, and so did the future presidents, which we're going to see. My friends, there's no easy way to put it except it's built on a foundation of lies, and you want to continue to follow it. Do you think they're telling you the truth now? The same fruit exists. Abraham Cannon wrote in his journal that Wilford Woodruff told his apostles that he was in such a position on the witness stand that he could not answer other than the way he did, end quote. That is in the journal of the apostles' records when they had a meeting about it. He said, I was on the stand, I couldn't say anything but what I did. Another lie. Back in 1811, Apostle Matthew Cowley said in a statement before the Council of the 12, quote, I have always been taught that when the brethren were in a tight place, that it would not be amiss to lie to help them out. One of the first presidents of the church made the statement some years ago that he would, quote, lie like hell to help his brethren. So LDS Wilford Woodruff was a liar along with the others. And why did he lie? So Mormonism could retain its assets, and so Utah could become a state. Trusting that the religious group and their leaders was telling the truth, the U.S. government in 1896 granted in good faith statehood to the Utah Territory. And guess what happened? Utah polygamous marriages rose immediately, which caused the Salt Lake Tribune to accuse LDS leaders of grand deception. The very year statehood was granted, a future president of the LDS Church, Joseph F. Smith, speaking at a meeting house dedication, defied the manifesto and said, quote, take care of your polygamous wives. We don't care for Uncle Sam now. Meaning we got statehood, we're going to do what I want. The point is Mormonism will always do what Mormonism wants to survive. Now compare this to the body of Christ. This is one of the major differences. The Christian church has always said, we will tell the truth even if it means being killed for it. We will tell the truth if it means martyrdom. We are not going to try to save the Christian church ourselves. That's not our duty. Our duty is to testify of Christ, and if we're killed for it, so be it. Mormonism has always been the different. They've always said we need to protect this earthly institution even if it means lying. Wilford Woodruff suddenly died in 1898, and Lorenzo Snow, a practicing polygamist, took the helm. When LDS historian B.H. Roberts was denied a seat in the House of Representatives because he was a polygamist, the Mormon leadership tried to circumvent the illegal nature of polygamy by authoring what was called the Evans Bill, which would make aspects of plural marriage legal again. Even though the bill was vetoed by the Utah governor at the time, the American people got wind of this Evans Bill that the Mormons were trying to reintroduce now as a state in the Union, and national widespread uproar commenced. And this culminated in an exhaustive investigation into the church by the U.S. Senate, which sort of came to a public head in something that was called the Reed-Smoot trials. You see, there was this Mormon senator named Reed-Smoot, and he had a congressional seat hanging by a thread because of him being a Mormon, and so it opened this whole thing up. Moving forward in 1801, Lorenzo Smith, now the 5th president of the church, died, and Joseph F. Smith became the 6th president, and the man who had many wives, and after the manifesto, and even encouraged others to break the manifesto secretly. Between 1902 and 1904, he personally okayed all sorts of plural marriages to secretly occur. But even though Smith was in favor of the Mormons' eternal principle, U.S. government pressures forced him to take some drastic measures to end it as an acceptable practice among the Utah Latter-day Saint faithful. Naturally, Joseph F. Smith was a liar, like the prophets before him who preceded him. But this time, the Reed-Smoot hearings exposed the theater of lies that these spiritual leaders of Mormonism told. Next week, we're going to discuss the Reed-Smoot hearings and hopefully wrap up this segment of Mormon history. Mormonism would recover. They ultimately excised the actual practice of polygamy, and they regained some national forgiveness by implementing this progressively rolling, larger, bigger public relations campaign. And still today, like yesterday, they never ever present the whole truth. They only tell you what they want you to hear, not what you need to. And so the practice of saying one thing publicly and doing another privately has in many ways among the Mormons become a way of life even today. It's present in every missionary discussion. It's alive every time a Mormon shares their faith, and it oozes out of every public relations campaign the Latter-day Saint Church puts upon us. You've been warned.